Hello everybody, and welcome to a tutorial in which I have no financial incentive to blatantly lie to your face. There are no sponsorships, there are no affiliate links, there aren't even any ads on the video, and I won't be lying to you, which I know that's a novel concept for a tutorial video, but that's the plan. If I get anything wrong, check for a pinned comment and I will correct myself in there and explain what I got wrong, how I got it wrong, what's actually right, and so on. If there's no pinned comment, I probably got everything right, hopefully. Anyway, today we're talking about mixing. What is audio mixing? Well, as you can see on the Wikipedia page, audio mixing is the process by which multiple sounds are combined into one or more channels. So here's an example of mixing. And there you go, that's mixing. Just combine two sounds into one channel, and that's all. Thank you everybody so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye. Except that's not what you're here for, is it? You're probably screaming at the screen, yo, hey, where's the EQ and the compression, and oh, the other thing, where are the, what's if I wouldn't press the fancy button? No, shut up. Except don't shut up. Those are fantastic questions. If you were to ask me how to drive, I could say, okay, driving is easy. You get in the car. By the way, don't ask me how to drive. I've never driven a car before. But if you were to ask me that, I could tell you. You get in the car, turn the key, press the gas pedal, and boom, you're driving. With that advice, you're just going to crash into whatever building's in front of you, but it is driving. And in this case, I've told you how to mix. But when you ask how to mix, there's an implicit well there. How do I mix well? How do I mix properly? So what does that actually mean? When mixing, you may have one instrument that sounds fantastic and another instrument that sounds fantastic, and then you play them at the same time. It just sounds like absolute garbage. And you're sitting there like, why? Why do they sound bad? And it all comes down to psychoacoustics in the end. There's a seemingly infinite number of different reasons why two sounds, when combined, could sound worse than they did by themselves. There are even some cases where they may sound better. So when it comes to mixing and learning how to mix, you're learning how to mix properly. You are learning how to make it so that when those sounds are combined, they still sound good, or sound even better. When combining two sounds makes them sound worse than they originally did, that is a mixing problem. A problem with mixing. So if anybody ever tells you that some certain procedure is just inherently a part of mixing, they are objectively incorrect. Mixing is just combining two sounds and just combining them into one audio channel. But now I should probably start explaining how to mix well. As I said before, there are a seemingly infinite number of things that can cause mixing problems, and so many things to keep track of, but through personal experience, I can give you a few things that you are most likely to run into most often. And then beyond that, research will kind of be your own responsibility. I can't really explain the entirety of psychoacoustics in a singular video or even in a series or anything. There's just so much to it. Luckily, almost all problems end up being one of the same few things. So let's have an example. Say we have George. George is in a room with you, and the room is 100% empty, and there are no cars outside, no birds chirping, absolutely 100% dead silent. George isn't right next to you, he's like a few feet away, and he's whispering to you about pickles. Like, pickles. George, huge fan of pickles. Like, you wouldn't even believe, and not just pickles, like pickled anything, but pickled cucumbers are his favorite, just pickles, which makes sense. Those are the things you see in grocery stores all the time. They're very popular. George isn't really the kind of person who dislikes something just because it's popular. He just loves pickles, and he's trying to whisper to you about them very quietly. But there's no other sound. Can you hear George? Most likely you can. There's no other sound. Even though he's quiet, he is all you'll be hearing. Now, let's add Steven to the mix. Steven is very rude, and he's just standing there screaming at the top of his lungs about pizza. Very, very disrespectful. The main takeaway of this video is don't be like Steven. Be respectful of those around you. But don't be afraid to speak your mind. You know, if you aren't interrupting anybody else, feel free to scream about pizza all you want. But anyway, say Steven's there screaming about pizza. George is there whispering to you about pickles. Can you hear George? If Steven's screaming loud enough, probably not. But George is at the same distance away, whispering at exactly the same volume as before. Why can you not hear George? The answer is auditory masking. There's a Wikipedia article on this, and I heavily recommend reading it. Auditory masking is going to be the main issue you're going to be running into when it comes to mixing. And there are various different types of auditory masking. The one that's by far the most common is frequency masking, which is the problem here with George and Steven. So you have George's voice and you have Steven's voice. They're both human voices. They're going to have similar frequency content, a lot of frequencies in the mid-range, and those will be overlapping with each other. And because of frequency masking, they will be reducing the clarity of each other. In this case, Steven is much louder than George, so George can't even really be heard at all. When it comes to music, this is a huge issue and very, very common. It's very common that you'll have two instruments playing at the same time and they have similar frequency content, and because that frequency content is overlapping, they will be reducing the clarity of each other. When people who have no idea what they're talking about talk about muddiness and all that other stuff, most of the time what they're referring to is frequency masking. Almost all of you have probably run into this problem at least once, probably per song or more. In my case, it's like 100 times per song because I have so many instruments for some reason. And you're probably wondering, how do we fix this? Well, here's the cool thing about evidence-based learning. Nothing I've told you so far is a lie, as far as I know. Again, check for a pinned comment. So we're now looking at factual information with sources at the bottom that we can look through when skeptical. And we have identified the problem. It is frequency masking. So how do we fix frequency masking? We fix it by not having it in the first place. Absolutely any course of action that prevents two instruments from playing at the same time over in the same frequency range will reduce frequency masking and as a result reduce the problem. For example, say you have two instruments playing at the same time and there's a lot of frequency masking between them and is making them both sound horrible. And say one of those instruments kind of has more stuff in around the 500 hertz area, and the other instrument has more stuff at around the 1000 hertz area. Well, with the 500 hertz instrument, you could use an EQ to reduce the volume of some of the frequencies around 1000, and then for the instrument playing at around 1000-ish, you could use an EQ to reduce some of the volume at around 500, because the thing about frequency masking is the closer the two instruments are to the same volume, the more frequency masking is going to occur. The greater the loss of clarity will be between the two instruments. So by attempting to kind of sculpt each instrument into its own area, you will be reducing that frequency masking, which reduces the problem. But that isn't the only solution. Let's take, for example, a kick drum and a sub bass. And let's say this kick drum has a lot of very low frequency content, as most of them generally do. And obviously the sub bass is a sub bass. So they're going to have a lot of overlap at these very low frequencies. You're probably already thinking, I don't want to high pass my sub bass. That's stupid. I don't want to high pass my kick. That's stupid in a lot of cases. What do we do? Well, again, look at the information we have. The issue is frequency masking. The solution is to remove the issue. So we want to remove frequency masking. And frequency masking is when two instruments are playing at the same time with overlapping frequencies. So sidechain is very, very useful here. Say you sidechain the volume of the sub bass so that its volume is reduced whenever the kick plays. So when the kick plays, the sub bass's volume is low, so they aren't really playing at the same time, so frequency masking is reduced. And there you go, there's the solution. Now remember, as I said earlier, you can use any method of reducing frequency masking. So some of you may be asking, what if my sub bass is actually like a full bass and it has tons of high frequencies and stuff? What if I don't want to reduce the volume of that whole thing whenever the kick plays? I want that bass to keep playing. You don't have to reduce the volume of the whole bass, because the issue here is frequency masking. The issue is where the frequencies are overlapping. So if you were to, for example, pull up an equalizer on the bass and then activate a low shelf to scoop out only the low frequencies, and then you sidechain the volume of that low shelf filter to the kick drum, then the bass will have its lower frequencies removed whenever the kick drum plays, but everything else is still allowed to continue playing. And this is really the best case scenario. Whenever the kick plays, the bass has its low frequencies removed, but the instrument is still playing. And in practice, you'll be surprised how natural this sounds. You may be thinking, oh, having its low frequencies changing like that, it'll sound awful. Surprisingly, due to the kick kind of filling in the area, you can hardly even tell it's happening at all, but you still get the significant increase in clarity. And again, I cannot emphasize this enough. It doesn't matter what method you use to reduce frequency masking, as long as it sounds good in the end. Just anything to reduce frequency masking. There are no rules with how to do it. You just do it. So as another example, maybe your kick drum has some higher frequencies right at the transient, which is very common. Right when the kick hits, you have those higher frequencies, and maybe that's clashing a bit with a hi-hat you have playing at the same time. A lot of times it sounds fine, but let's say in this specific scenario it sounds bad. And let's say the issue is because of frequency masking. A potential solution could be to delay that hi-hat very slightly, or maybe move it backwards slightly so that the transient doesn't line up with the kick. So then the high frequencies of the kick will be playing at a slightly different time than the higher frequencies in that hi-hat. That's another way to fix frequency masking. The method you use legitimately does not matter, just as long as it fixes the problem. Another example, let's say you have an instrument where the volume's going all over the place. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's obnoxiously loud, and when it's obnoxiously loud, it ends up sounding horrible, and, let's say it's causing frequency masking. Let's say it's clashing with a ton of other stuff, and we don't want that. You can throw a compressor on, which reduces the volume of the louder parts while keeping the quiet parts the same. Mixing! Woo! And that's legitimately all there is to it. You look for objective issues with actual factual information behind them, for example, the auditory masking Wikipedia article, and you look at what those problems are, and then you just logic your way through, how do I avoid these problems? And that is it. Almost every single mixing tutorial I've seen in my life has had a heavy incentive to lie to you, and they lie to you. They intentionally make the topic seem so much more complicated than it needs to be. There is no voodoo magic. There is no boost snare at 300 hertz by 3 dB to do the boxiness thingy, and then it all sounds like Marshmallow, Dead Mouse, Martin Gaye. No, shut up. Tell them to shut up. Unsubscribe from them. Dislike the videos. Leave angry comment. Okay, maybe I shouldn't be inciting a riot. Leave peacefully if you want to. That's fine. Just don't listen to the garbage. I don't mean to offend anybody. I'm sorry. Except I absolutely do. If you lie to your viewers, you suck. Before I go too off the rails with ranting about other YouTube channels, there is one more thing I feel like I should mention about frequency masking specifically, and that is layering. Frequency masking only occurs between two instruments if those two instruments are actually audibly distinct from each other. For example, say you have a saw wave, and then another saw wave, and then another saw wave, and another saw wave, and another saw wave. All of those are playing the same note at very, very slightly different pitches, and that makes a supersaw, Most of you probably already know about that, and some of you may already be asking the question, why is frequency masking not a problem here? It's the same instrument over and over again. There's tons of frequency overlap here, and that's because the resulting sound only sounds like one sound. Frequency masking becomes an issue when two instruments are regarded as separate sound sources. And this could easily start getting into more advanced topics that I'm trying to avoid, but if the overtones of the instruments line up with each other nearly perfectly, and the two instruments are playing the same notes or some simple frequency ratio from those notes consistently, they're going to be heard as the same instrument. So you don't need to worry about frequency masking between those at all. If you can manage to get multiple sound sources to kind of sound like the same source of sound, then frequency masking will not be a problem. And that's very useful. It allows you to cram in many, many more instruments than you normally would be able to, because you simply don't need to worry about separating them. I don't think I have much else to say. Just I recommend reading the auditory masking Wikipedia article. Tons of very valuable information, and it's a surprisingly easy read. Not saying it's an easy read, but it's easier than I would expect for the topic. It is worded very well. And before the temptation to start bashing other YouTube channels and websites and stuff comes back, I should probably end this. You know what? No, let's start insulting people. Hold on a bit. You know, I find it funny how I legitimately do not care what goes into my search history, and yet I cannot bring myself to pull this up without opening a private tab. Let's see. Mixing EQ cheat sheet. Oh boy. I hate the fact that I type those words in. Let's see. D bass. Okay. Warmth. What does that mean? Why does reducing this make it warm? What is it? D box. It's the box thing again. What does box mean? Can somebody please, here, $1 million reward. Somebody define box, but not like the actual definition of box. I'm talking about the fake box that does. See, what does it mean? Everybody's talking about the boxiness. What does it mean? Clarity, because for some reason reducing frequencies in this specific undefined range makes things clearer, and nobody knows why. Crisp. Okay, apparently reducing very high frequencies makes things crisper, whatever crisp even means. Okay, I'm done with this one. What else is there? Oh, this is fun. Rumbly, boomy, muddy, boxy! Ah! Why? Oh, the boxes, they're everywhere. I can't escape them. Everywhere I go, there are just more boxes. Ooh, reduce mud by just dipping things at 200 to 450 hertz arbitrarily. This is good advice. Don't forget, EQ won't fix a poor sample. Well, as far as I know, no audio tool will fix your poor advice. Get out of here. Oh, the boxes, they're back. Oh, the boxes, they're back. Oh, they're everywhere. Rumble, use a high-pass filter and remove this. What? What? You use a high pass filter and remove 20 hertz to 80 hertz? Look, don't forget, EQ won't fix a poor we're talking vocal EQ. Okay, that makes much more sense. Okay, rumble, booming, box. The boxes are back. Ah, they're always here. I am going to die. Cut the 220 hertz frequency by native CC. The boxiness. You know, I got to just stop and say I find it funny how they kind of put the steps out of order here, which I know that's fine, but it's just that the order literally doesn't matter. It's an EQ. It's a linear process. By definition, it's going to sound the same no matter what order you do it in. Okay, so apparently this is for a piano. Okay. Cut the mid-low resonant frequency between 440 hertz by 5. Why? You know, I'd like to focus on this one. See, we've seen a lot of garbage here, but I feel like this is probably the worst, even though it doesn't have as much stuff in it as the others. 64 hertz. Why? That is so specific. And I find it funny how they give such a specific hertz value, but then they don't even tell you what slope to use, which is far more important. Even if there was any amount of logic behind this whatsoever. Add a high shelf EQ filter starting at 3 kilohertz and boost it to add more. Why? Like they don't explain any of this. They're especially boxing this. What does it mean? So like here's my question with this. So as we all probably know, every piano sounds different. The way it's recorded will be different every time. So you're going to be working with a different general frequency spectrum. And when you're working with a piano, it's oftentimes going to be a sampled piano. Let's say you're working with a sampled piano, and this will still apply to a recorded piano. But say you're working with a sound font. Okay, let's say hypothetically, and this isn't true at all, but let's say we're in a mystical universe where these specific settings are an objective improvement to the piano. What if the person who made that sound font already made those corrections? So what? We load in the piano and we do it again? What if we load in the piano and then we do this again and then we export that as a sound font so that we don't need to bother with that later, and then we distribute that to other people because it sounds better, and then they take it. Do they do this too? How many times are we going to EQ this? Only once? Okay, how do we know whether it's been EQ'd like this already or not? The logic falls apart very quickly when there is no logic to be had. It's all made up. It's all quackery, pseudoscience, bullcrap. None of this means anything. When you're looking at resources for how audio works, always ask why. Always challenge everything. Question everything. And you're going to find that most things you find are absolute bullcrap. Do not listen to them. Ignore them. All right, here's my professional advice for EQing a piano. You take the bands and the shells and the filters and you put them where they sound good, and you don't put them where they don't sound good. That's it. And it's actually legitimately good advice, but also it's blatantly obvious, so please don't even think about it. Just do what sounds good. And gosh, what does boxiness mean? This might be worse. Oh, it's the same website. That explains it. It's got the resonant frequencies at around 600 hertz. And it shows like this tiny dip. Look, I've never played a guitar. I've never made a guitar. I have created physically modeled guitars. I'm pretty good at it, I think. And here's my wisdom. If you think every guitar, if you think most guitars, if you think more than 4, maybe 1% of guitars have a frequency spike at exactly 600 hertz. Once again, I'm not an expert, but you're wrong. That's not true. I don't know why I need to be saying this, but this is here. It also says cut the sub-bass frequencies 80 hertz and below using a high-pass filter. Once again, it doesn't specify the slope of the high-pass filter, and even if it did, it would still be wrong because you should just do what sounds good, and every guitar is different. Sometimes you want the sub-frequencies in the guitar. In fact, I very heavily recommend leaving the sub-frequencies in the guitar if you have no other instruments of that range. If you do have instruments of that range, I mean, this whole video is just talking about frequency masking, so you already know what to do about that, using actual facts and logic. Gosh. But there's also the fact that 80 hertz, if you're trying to completely remove sub-content, I really don't feel like that's high enough unless you're using a fairly steep slope, because it doesn't actually cut everything below 80 hertz. 80 hertz is just the point where it's at -3 dB or -6 dB or something else, depending on what the slope is. There's still frequency content below that. Anyway, I don't need a nitpick when this other stuff is here. boost the body to add weight. I mean, what if the guitar already has that? It says electric guitar, so you're most likely already running it through some effects. What if it already has that area boosted? Do you boost it again? Okay. Now what if you like sample that and you're using an electric guitar, you open your electric guitar EQ cheat sheet, it's already been boosted there. Do you boost it again? No? When do you boost it then? When it sounds good? Okay, then what's the point of this guide? ATTN, Amateur Novice Mixers, the only EQ chart you'll ever need for mixing. Let's take a look. Harmonics? What does that even mean in this context? The harmonics of what? If you have harmonics specifically between 500 hertz and what this is like around 4,000 hertz, that means, okay, so that you're using an instrument with a fundamental at 250, except it's kind of a bump here, which implies it's louder here. So like maybe, I don't know, maybe it's more like a square wave or something. And then, and then you have it low passed. And then, but that's not what, I'm pretty sure that's not what they mean. Actually, I can tell you what they mean. They mean nothing at all. These words don't mean anything. There's no objective definition to them. They're just making crap up. I feel like I've beaten this topic to death, but man, they just won't stop. Thickness, warmth, mud, boom, rumble, sub. Hey, at least there's no mention of a box. I can live another day. All right, I gotta end this video before I have an aneurysm. Always keep learning. Question everything. Definitely question everything. Like, especially question this. I'm questioning it right now and I'm getting no answers. And if you have any questions, ask them and I'll answer them. And I don't think I have anything else to say. I'm bad with outros. Stay hydrated and goodbye.